Hey and welcome back to my new video. My server is slowly coming to an end, so I figured this is the perfect time to talk about some of the actual endgame content of Manibus scenario. Prime Wars. So what exactly is a Prime War? Prime Wars are large-scale public PvE events where players on the server work together to defend a Staroid Restrainer against bosses and its minions. The basic idea is actually pretty simple. The boss spawns, starts moving towards the Restrainer, and you have to kill it before it destroys your defensive and eventually the Restrainer itself. But there are multiple difficulties and things get quite a bit more interesting later on. You start with a basic Prime War followed by Hard and Pro. These all follow basically the same formula. You fight one of several great ones like the Ravenous Hunter, Shadowhound or Secret Servitor, with just increasingly difficult versions of the encounter. After that you get Nightmare. This is where the fight changes significantly because now you're fighting Manibus himself, while additional bosses and enemies spawn around the battlefield. And finally there's Apocalyptic, which is essentially an even harder version of the Manibus fight. Here you can't simply focus Manibus. After breaking the Silver Plague shield on one of his arms, additional bosses spawn on the ground. You have to clear those out before the arm becomes vulnerable again. But before we get into all of that, let's look how a normal Prime War actually works. If you're starting the Prime War yourself, you go to the Staroid Restrainer and you activate it using Staroids. This announces the Prime War to the server and gives everyone a few minutes to teleport in and prepare. And this preparation actually is important because Prime Wars allow you to build inside the event area. Usually you will see people setting up walls or fences between the boss spawn and the Restrainer, as well as platforms with turrets. And there's a reason for both of these. When the boss spawns, you will notice it has two different health bars. The first one is its Silver Plague shield. Normal weapons are basically useless against this shield. Instead, you need explosives specifically capable of damaging Silver Plague. The traditional way of doing this is to build a turret and load it with Biomass Missiles. Fire those into the boss until the Silver Plague shield breaks, and only then can everyone start unloading their normal weapons into its actual health bar. If the boss survives for long enough, the shield can return and you simply repeat the process. There are also other options now, including Mr. Wish rocket launcher and newer types of Silver Plague ammunition. But Biomass Missiles and turrets are still the easiest way to understand the basic mechanic. And conveniently, this also starts to explain how Prime War's scoring system works. There are essentially four ways to earn contribution points to a Prime War. First, Silver Plague damage. Every time you help destroy the boss's shield, you earn contribution. Second is actual boss damage. Once the shield is gone, you can damage the boss. The third kind is block damage. If the boss attacks or destroys structures you built, the damage absorbed by those structures contributes towards your rating. And this is actually really useful for newer players. If you don't have a great build yet, don't have a turret, or simply don't want to spend a bunch of resources on missiles, you can build walls and fences in the path of the boss. Let the boss destroy them and you can earn a surprising amount of contribution without doing much damage yourself. And finally, there's support. Healing or reviving players also contributes towards your rating. In modern Prime Wars this is much harder to achieve since basically the boss dies in 15 seconds and you don't have the time to revive someone or heal yourself. So yeah, you don't necessarily need an insane endgame build to maximize your rewards. At the end of the Prime War, your individual contribution determines which reward crates you receive. There are 3 reward tiers, with the final crate obviously being the one you want. The exact score requirements depends on the difficulty, but you can actually see the required rating directly on the Prime War before joining. Getting the maximum reward is also important for progression, because completing the lower difficulties and the required rating unlocks the higher Prime Wars. So you'll work your way from normal Prime War through Hard, Pro before eventually reaching Nightmare. The normal Prime War bosses do have their own mechanics. The Ravenous Hunter, for example, can fire a massive missile into the air you need to destroy. The Secret Servitor can split into multiple versions of itself, and the Shadowhound has its own movement and attack phases. But realistically, if you're doing this with an active server, most of the normal Prime Wars are pretty straightforward. The Silver Plague shield gets deleted, everyone blasts the boss, it does its mechanic, and then everyone blasts it again. Nightmare is where things become more interesting. Instead of fighting one normal boss, Nightmare introduces Manibus. You'll have his massive arms above the battlefield while other smaller bosses and enemies spawn on the ground. And importantly, normal Biomass Missiles don't work against Manibus' Silver Plague shield. For that you need red plasma ammunition. So the general loop becomes dealing with the enemies and bosses on the ground while using red plasma to destroy the shields on the Manibus arms, then damaging the exposed arm with your normal weapons. Apocalyptic takes that concept one step further. Once you break Silver Plague shield on Manibus, additional bosses spawn, and this time you cannot simply ignore them. Manibus becomes protected until those bosses are dead, so the group has to clear them before continuing the damaging phase. So Nightmare and especially Apocalyptic Prime Wars require a bit more preparation and coordination than the earlier difficulties. And I would highly advise you, if you don't know what you're doing, do not start them. So you might be asking, why should you do Prime Wars in the first place? Apart from the normal Prime War loot and progression, there's another very good reason to actually finish the endgame content: Scenario Honor. In Manibus, reaching 350 scenario rating gives you a random level 17 armor mod, and reaching 500 rating gives you a random shiny mod. So if you're approaching the end of your Manibus scenario, these are some of the rewards you don't want to forget about. And Prime Wars make up a major part of your Manibus endgame progression. So even if you ignored them for most of the scenario, grab some building materials, craft some biomass missiles, and join your server when they are running them. Work your way through the difficulties and earn your rewards. Because once you understand the mechanics, Prime Wars are honestly much simpler than they initially look. Personally, I ignored them for most of my run the scenario, because I found the rewards of farming Forsaken Giant much more appealing. But on the last 2 days I decided I still want to go for that 350 rating to get my level 17 mod, and obviously make this video. So I hope you enjoyed the video. If so, it would be nice if you like and subscribe. See you in the next one. Bye bye.